What is going on, New York Giant fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Big Blue in the Bronx podcast. Hope you guys are doing well. Hit the like button, comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications so you know when a live stream pops or video drops. Appreciate you coming back. Share this out on the podcast platforms, and do all the good stuff. So, currently doing this out of my Airbnb here in Hollandale Beach, Florida. But we're still going to get the show done. Second half segment with Matt O'Leary, who we talked with last year before the Jets-Giants game. And, of course, I did the same this time around. So, nothing too big today. We're going to talk about the Jets-Giants joint practice, some of the concerns that came out of that, some final roster battles, players to look for, and that's pretty much that. So, the Jets-Giants joint practice. Now, I wasn't there, didn't watch much footage of it. It was pretty much all via the Twitter updates. And there are two conceptions of what happened in the joint practice. There was, the Giants got their asses beat. And there was, the Giants didn't win the practice, but it wasn't as bad as the media made it out to be. Now, personally, I think the second one probably sticks a little bit more. I know that a couple of Jet content creators put out videos on it, and people said, well, it really wasn't as bad as the beat media said. So I'd like to think that's an accurate statement. And I know sometimes some fans can be homers and, play the blue card and whatnot. But I think that the Jets winning the practice was definitely going to be more expected because there's two things. And we'll go over, the certain plays that happened. But there's two things, right? The Jets, I think, will probably took it more seriously. Not that the Giants didn't take it seriously, because the Giants, they've played their starters in the preseason. They didn't play much of Week 1, but they played in Week 2 against the Texans. Whereas the Jets, right, they have not played all preseason, the starters. And the joint practices have been the game format for these guys to get reps. So that could, in my opinion, be a problem for the Jets down the road. But is it really my concern? No, it's not my concern. I was just making a general statement on that. So that's number one. And I forget my second point, but nonetheless. So they probably, again, take it more seriously. Oh, yeah. And they're also a more talented team. And it's not making excuses, it's just saying facts. I think the Jets are going to do better than the Giants this year. Now, I don't know how that's going to go because Robert Saleh is still questionable as a coach. Nathaniel Hackett's still questionable as an offensive coordinator. There's a lot of questions with the Jets, but those are the two reasons I think the Jets really ended up winning the practice and were favored in the practice. Again, I know it's just practice, but at the same time, when you're looking at these two teams stack up and the Jets taking it a little bit more seriously, you have to make all the points that are salient. Now, here is the lineup of throws against the Giants defense that were made with the number ones in for the Jets and the Giants. So there was a sack for no yard gain. There was a Brian Burns tackle for a loss. There was an Alan Lazard 5-yard catch. There was a Burns and Dex sack. There was a Tyler Nubin pass deflection, followed by a 1-yard throw to Lazard, an incomplete pass, a Breece Hall receiving touchdown, offensive holding, Lazard dropped touchdown, a big rollout play to Garrett Wilson, no yard gain on a run, a completion to Alan Lazard, a run stop, an incompletion to Garrett Wilson, a 4-yard run, a seam to Jeremy Ruckert, a 4-yard run, a 7-yard pass, a 1-yard pass, a no-yard pass, a 0-yard run, a 12-yard run, an incompletion, a 6-yard run, a deep touchdown to Garrett Wilson, a 5-yard pass to Wilson, an 8-yard pass to Wilson, incompletion, 5-yard pass to Wilson, 10-yard pass, 1-yard pass, an interception that was called back to a holding penalty, and then a touchdown to Alan Lazard versus Trey Hawkins. So, obviously, the most of the reps were to Garrett Wilson. That's fine. He's their number one wide receiver, and he, is one of the best receivers in the league, and he's their main target, all right? What I do want to know is, how was Deonte Banks doing? Was it Garrett Wilson all the time on Deonte Banks? Were they switching up guys? I definitely know Nick McLeod was having his fair share of snaps on Garrett Wilson. Now, we're going to talk about that in just a second. But based on this, I think, I don't want to say it was an even practice because the Giants did get any turnovers. They made some nice plays based on the play log. But I don't think it was a total beatdown where the Giants were surrendering, a touchdown every play or a big play every play. Of course, you're not playing the entire field most of the time in these joint practices. It's either half the field or, I know the Jets' way of doing things. So, but I would like to know, like Wilson got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 6 catches in this period. So, I'd like to question, when it wasn't McLeod on him, was it Deonte Banks? And it's kind of why I wanted the starters to play this weekend, but that's also going to be another conversation. So, I don't think the Giants' defense did it as bad as the media said, but again, that's not for me to, make all these speculations about. This is just my opinion. But we will see what happens in 2-ish weeks when they step on the field versus the Minnesota Vikings. So now let's get to the point I've been talking about pretty much for several weeks, and that's the cornerback 2 spot. Supposedly there's some rumors out there that the Panthers might trade J.C. Horn. Now, I don't know who the suitor is going to be. I think it's because the last regime drafted him, and he's coming up on a contract year pretty soon. I think it's this year, actually. And they need to get rid of his contract because they, I guess, feel that he's not part of the future, and he's from the past regime. That's fine and well. But the Giants, in my opinion, that has not changed, by the way. In my opinion, they need to go out there and trade or sign a veteran corner. In my opinion, waiver wire is not going to fix anything. It got you Fabian Moreau one year, but I'm pretty sure you lucked into him. Right? I think that the waiver wire is good for some special teams help, a couple of backup spots on the O-line, D-line, but it's not going to really get you all these great starters. It's really not. I mean, again, it's mostly for like second-tier guys and backups. If you're looking for a starting position at the waiver wire, you probably didn't do a good job assessing the position when you had time, right? I've said Ahkello Witherspoon, the guy from the Rams. I don't know what his deal is. Is it an injury he's harboring? Is it he wants more money? I don't know how much money he would want at this time of the year because guess what? Every team is pretty much solidified at the corner position, and there's not really any teams except for the Giants and maybe a few others that are going after the corner position. So maybe he ought to lower his price to like 1 year veteran minimum, and he plays with the Giants for 1 year, and maybe he goes off, maybe he sucks, but at least you're taking a shot and you're getting a good guy in the building. Keeping Nick McLeod, I like McLeod, but you saw it in the joint practices and the highlights, right? Garrett Wilson was absolutely toasting him. Now, they were going viral and saying, he's all beaten up on the Giants' defense, which is true. It is true, but at the same time, it is Nick McLeod. But why that also holds relevancy is because that could be our starting corner going into the season, right? That could be the Giants' starting corner. It's not some scrub, he's playing because of injury or something. No, he could legitimately be our starting corner, and I think that's a huge problem. I think it's a huge problem because, I don't know if we'll see Jordan Addison in week 1, but you got Justin Jefferson in week 2. What if Brandon Ayuk gets traded to the Commanders and you have him and Terry McLaurin? It's going to be a dicey situation, and the Giants, with this bend but don't break philosophy, it's not going to help if you don't have a second corner. Like, you need to at least have somebody solid back there. Cordell Flott has not played pretty much the entire preseason due to a quad injury, so I don't know about him, right? I'm out on him. I'm out on him because it seems like the Matt Parrott pick, to where he didn't get playing time because the coaches probably thought he wasn't ready, but also injury, but also he's not very good when he's on the field. They don't have a role for him. So I would like the Giants to think better in terms of using their third round pick in a role, right? This was a third round pick, the first third round pick they made in 2022, and it seems like nothing has come of it. First year, he barely played. I mean, played more outside as the year went on. Last year wasn't great. And this year, I mean, he was getting lit up pretty much all at training camp. And again, when Malik Neighbors was destroying them in training camp, a lot of people said, okay, well, that's Malik Neighbors. That's his talent. Okay. And then when it turned to Jamison Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown, they were getting toasted. So I'm not worried about the slot corner position. I think the Giants have plenty of bodies that could probably figure that out. But at the end of the day, that second corner position, I mean, the Giants have been in this boat before. They were in this boat in 2020. They were in this boat in 2022. And 2024 doesn't look much better. I would argue 2022 might be like 2020 because they had Corey Ballantyne at second corner next to James Bradbury, which was awful. But, you know, I guess you could kind of give the excuse it was a new coaching staff and they really didn't assess the need properly. But it's just confirming what we know out of these practices, out of these preseason games. Nick McLeod is not going to hold a candle to any legitimate, serious wide receiver and even any legitimate, serious corner, because if you're not, if you're getting like absolutely toasted on that one route that Garrett Wilson ran, it's not going to be fun for the secondary. I don't care if you're bend but don't break. There could be a few reps that you play press and you could absolutely get destroyed. So. And I don't think Trey Hawkins should be serving that role either. I mean, for me, he was a 6th-round pick. He's a guy that came in last year, didn't do too well. To me, he's a reserve corner. 6th-round pick, you really don't have all the hype for. You don't have all the, most hope in the world for. Micah McFadden, a 5th-round pick, actually impressed his rookie year. So that's where you said, okay, well, he may, meaning Joe Shane, have found a gem. But I don't think he found a gem with Hawkins. I think he's just a backup corner. Now, could he do better in his own system? Sure, but I would have to see that on the field. But I think in terms of where the Giants are as a team, I think they need to start making progress. I think they need to start winning games. And corner 2, you can't be fumbling and juggling around with. It's just not healthy. But one of my other concerns is why the starters are not going to play. Now I get it. They'd probably be going against the Jets backups, and I ripped the Jets before for not playing their starters. But this is a team, right, they still need some gelling. Defensively, you don't know who corner 2 is. I mean, I'm not worried about the front 4, though you do need to get an inside linebacker next to Bobby Okereke because McFadden's hurt, Deontay Johnson's hurt. So we'll see if Deontay Johnson makes the roster. But you still need a corner too. And it'd be nice to go up against starters. Again, they're not going to play. But it'd be nice to go up against them and, have a feel for it. Enough with these joint practices. We need tackling. We need real game action, real hands, and all that other sort of stuff. But as far as the offense goes, I mean, I'm not too worried about the O-line gelling. I mean, I think they've done a nice job. I don't think they've done horribly. But as for the quarterback, who's coming off of a torn ACL, and he had a horrible week against the Texans, and he plays better against the second team, but the timing still isn't there. There's a couple of things that still are not there with Daniel Jones. And whether we like it or not, he's going to be the starting quarterback coming into the season. So his timing, he needs all the practice in the world. He needs all the game reps in the world. Now, I'm not saying he should have played all 3 preseason games, but one half is not going to really do anything when you look at these teams like the Bengals and the Colts and the Chiefs and the Packers across the league. They're playing their starters. So I really don't think and I get it, the Giants may be afraid of injuries and stuff like that, but if you're afraid of injuries, this is my personal opinion, if you're afraid of injuries, then you don't have good depth. It's that simple. If you're afraid of injuries, you do not have good depth. But let's go to the final swing and the final battles that need to be sorted out, I should say. Swing offensive tackle, swing offensive guard. Nobody's really pulled away with that. Josh Ozudu, he probably makes the roster because of the fact that he was a third-round pick a couple of years ago, so he probably stays. But you also need a swing guard. There's also a couple of different positions that need to be sorted out. I think is the backup center. That's one. Schlodman and Jimmy Morrissey. That needs to be sorted out. Does Jake Kubis make the roster as a swing offensive guard? That could be sorted out. I mean, the guards really haven't impressed me too much, but I think Jake Kubis would be a nice addition. Stinney, I would also keep him for veteran purposes. Maybe you need another offensive tackle. I don't know how many tackles the Giants are going to keep, but if they keep 4, you got Ozudu and maybe Joshua Miles. I think Joshua Miles should make this roster. If he doesn't, I'd be surprised and a little weirded out because the other tackles have not stuck out. Yannick Ajusti not stuck out. Who else hasn't stuck out? Matt Nelson. He's been horrible. Matt Nelson's been awful, so he probably won't make the roster. Corner 2 is probably not going to get solved this week, but what you could solve this week is backup corner, who's going to be on the roster. Is it David Long, who's going to be one of the reserve corners? Personally, I would take him over McLeod at second corner, but I'm not the general manager, nor am I the head coach. So, Trey Herndon, does he get a spot? Darnay Holmes, does he get a spot? There's a couple other positions back there, like, again, Banks makes the roster, Flott makes the roster. You could say Hawkins makes the roster. Flott makes the roster, but there's 2-3 other spots that need to be filled. Wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6. Gunnar Olszewski is out. He's out with an injury. Gunnar Olszewski is out with an injury. He's going to be out 2 to 4 weeks. So that means, in my opinion, Isaiah McKenzie has won that spot. He's won the spot for wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6, as a punt returner, as a receiver, as a kick returner. Now, you need to find somebody that's next to him, because you have Slayton, Hyatt, Neighbors, Robinson, then you had McKenzie. Who's that next guy going to be? You can't keep just 5 wide receivers. You keep 7 if you want, but 6 is the most likely outcome. Do you want to keep Miles Boykin because of special teams? Do you want to keep Allen Robinson because of veteran leadership? Who do you want to keep? I mean, the Giants do need solid wide receiver depth, wherever it comes from. So, we'll see about that. Tight end 3, I personally think that Chris Manhertz has a leg up in the competition. Lawrence Cager, I don't know if he's come back from injury yet, but it doesn't look good for him. And you also have Jack Stoll, who was healthy last game. So, it's going to be between Manhertz and Stoll as the tight end 3 position. As far as inside linebacker goes, you kind of need to find an inside linebacker too. I mean, I could see them sticking with McFadden and then later on probably rotating some guys in. But also you need depth there. Matt Adams, I know he got injured against the Texans, but you also have Deontay Johnson who's injured. You have a couple other guys who are injured and can't play. So are these guys going to make the roster? Are they not going to make the roster? You need depth there. Edge 3, edge 4. That's a position that I'm really focusing in on because Azeez Ojulari has been very, very quiet this training camp. And, you know, he's beaten Josh Ozudu sometimes, but I think Benton Whitley has stood out the most. I know he's got a sack, he's got some tackles for a loss. He's been the most impressive. He really has been the most impressive on the edge rushing squad outside of course, Thibodeau and Burns. But this is another position I think the Giants might look to go to the waiver wire for because Ojulari, the thought seemed nice of having him as a backup edge, but at the same time, he has not produced. So do they keep him? Do they trade him? Do they release him? Again, a lot of things to be speculated here, but I think Benton Whitley does make the roster, and I think he could definitely do wonders against these Jets backups. Which leads me into the final segment, which is the roster bubble players to watch. Benton Whitley, he's one of my guys because he's been impressing all preseason. I think he's already made the roster, but if he keeps it up, I think it's more secure by the day. David Long, I would like to see what he does. Veteran corner, try to carve out a role If they don't like McLeod, maybe Long is the corner that they imagine at that second spot. Trey Herndon, I mean, he's done some outside and some slot work. I think he's a solid veteran that you can keep on the team, but if they don't see the results, then there's no reason. Jake Kubis, would love to see another strong performance out of him. The Jets have some solid D line depth, and would like to see Kubis get to that second level. So, really excited to watch him. Offensive tackle Josh Miles. Yanni Kajusi just went on IR, so they did not pick up another offensive tackle. And as far as Josh Miles goes, he's had a really good preseason. He's had a really good camp, and I think he deserves to make the roster because McKeithen, he's been okay, but nothing stood out, which that's just my opinion. But Miles has this game to make his final remark in terms of, a final say on his play. Joshua Zudu and Marcus McKeithen. Zudu had a good game against the Texans, bad game against the Lions. Would like to see what the end result is, and McKeithen would like to see him because at the end of the day, it's not even a guarantee he makes this roster. Isaiah McKenzie, I think he's got pretty much locked up so we can move on. Casey Rogers. Casey Rogers was not really great last game. He wasn't getting much push. The D-line wasn't getting much push against the Texans, which a little concerned about that because that's D-line depth. But he did do good the first game. In the second half, he was pretty visible. He did get a sack, but it was a face mask penalty. So he's a guy that's still vying for a roster spot. Trey Kaiser, this guy that they just signed to be one of the linebackers just for a game, 2.5 sacks, 9.5 tackles for a loss, and 68 tackles last year with the South Alabama college football team. And defensive tackle Kyler Ball last year. They just signed him as well for D-line depth. They waived Ryder Anderson, 5.5 tackles for loss, 41 tackles, 3 sacks, 13 games played. And also, just to add in a little one, and this guy's not really a roster bubble player, but Evan Neal. Evan Neal looks like he's going to play. Not that I'm going to get too overhyped of Evan Neal because he's going up against backups, but realistically, I'd like to see some improved technique against some of these other guys because I think they'll be facing guys like Tack McKinley. I think you'll see Will McDonald playing, so you'll see some decent edges against Evan Neal. And then hopefully, if Evan Neal ever has to come into a situation in the regular season, he's ready, he's got the technique, and he can at least be solid. But that's the end of the first half segment. We are going to send it over to the interview/discussion with Jets content creator Matt O'Leary. All right, so for the second half of our show, we have a great Jets content creator, Mr. Matt O'Leary. He and I are going to talk some Jets to get to know the opposition, and of course talk a little bit about the joint practices that were going on this week between the Jets and the Giants at Florham Park. Matt, what are your thoughts on the Jets so far? Obviously, we saw what happened last year, but how do you feel about the Jets so far this summer, man?
Yeah, so a lot of optimism right now surrounding the New York Jets. And, it's understandable. Fans were really excited last year to get Aaron Rodgers. And unfortunately, we know what happens. He goes down and just a couple plays into the season. So getting him back and healthy and seeing the additions both through the draft and free agency come in, and just seeing that kind of go through and give us a preview through training camp in these preseason games has been a lot of fun. Expectations are high once again for the Jets going into this year. And while we didn't get to see and we won't see any starters for the Jets in the preseason, we saw plenty of them in training camp. And offense looks like it's in good shape, which is a great sign heading into the season.
Yeah, definitely. After last year, I remember one of the worst statistics that the Jets put out was being, I think it was definitely last in third down percentage and one of the worst since the AFL NFL merger. So you can't really get more bottom than that. But let's go into it. You were talking about free agency, some of the moves that the New York Jets have made. And I know a couple of Jet fans, but of course, we're here to get your thoughts. What are your thoughts on the Hassan Reddick situation? A little bit later, we'll go into the confidence in Will McDonald, the first round pick out of Iowa State last year. What do you make of the situation?
Yeah, it's kind of just gotten to a frustrating point. It really goes back to the Jets not paying Bryce Huff a year ago, and they let him go into a contract year and weren't able to retain him. So my preference was always to sign Bryce Huff. I was a big advocate for doing that a year ago, but once they lost him in free agency, I thought the trade was a good pivot point. I just think they got to find a way to meet in the middle somewhere because the Jets need him to reach their full potential on defense. And Hassan Reddick, also at his age, like he can't afford to sit out of a season. So I think both sides are just being a little bit stubborn right now. And I'm good with giving him, an increase in pay in this year and maybe tacking on an additional year if you have to kind of line up with this window you have with Aaron Rodgers. And, guys are going to have to start getting paid pretty soon. Sauce Gardner's due a new contract, and Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, they're all going to get deals soon. So you can't go too long term. But to me, again, I feel like if you're in a go for it window, you got to figure out a way to get him here, and then two, keep him here for at least this year and maybe another one on top of it.
Yeah, definitely. So, um, you mentioned, of course, that in the joint practices, that's where we've seen the Jets starters this week against the Giants, a couple weeks ago against the Panthers. You also guys had against Washington, if I can remember correctly. What are your thoughts on them basically not playing their starters in the entire preseason? Now, that could change, but at least I'll accept Sal's word on that because, I mean, I personally, I would like the Giants to play their starters this weekend. It's not going to happen. But, considering that there's a new offensive line, the offense has a couple of new pieces. Aaron Rodgers is, 40 years old, and he's coming off of a serious injury. What are your thoughts on them not playing their starters and the impact it may have to start the season?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a huge deal. I mean, if the only negative that I have on them not playing is really the new offensive line combination, which you just brought up, and them gelling a little bit. But something they put an emphasis on is what in the joint practices, kind of treating them as game situations. And in a press conference this week, both Robert Saleh and Aaron Rodgers talked about how they treated camp very differently this year than a year ago. At this point, a year ago, or at this point now, compared to a year ago, they've ran like 300 more plays offensively, the first team, which is a really big difference. So I think they've kind of just are using and simulating game situations in these training camp practices. We'll see if that has any impact on how the offense looks, or if they look a little rusty coming out of the gate in week one against San Francisco. But I think the Jets are just trying to play it safe. They saw what happened with injuries last year, not just to Aaron Rodgers, but they were ravished by injuries on the offensive line as well. And I think maybe they were just a little scorned by that and kind of just want to, make sure that everyone goes into the season at their full health. At the same time, though, like we've been saying here, you do run the risk of being a little bit rusty to start the year, but I think they'd rather that than lose someone to injury.
Yeah, definitely. And talking about Rodgers a little bit, um, moving to the draft pick that was made this year, that a lot of Jet fans, probably a lot of Jet fans' favorite draft pick, and I know I'm going to go a little far with this one. He's not going to play because I believe he's still on the PUP list. But Jordan Travis, what were your thoughts on that draft pick? And could he be a potential heir to Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, so I was really a big proponent of the Jets using a draft pick on the quarterback position this year, not early in the first round or in the first couple rounds, but I thought a day three swing on quarterback and have them sit and develop behind not only Aaron Rodgers, but Tyrod Taylor too for the next couple years, I think would do a young player well. So I like the Jordan Travis swing. There's really no way to know if it's going to work out. I mean, the draft is such a crapshoot to begin with. People are taken in the top three and don't hit. Unfortunately, the last two quarterbacks the Jets drafted in the first round, both top three picks, none of them panned out. Neither Darnold or Zach Wilson became the long-term answer for the Jets. So you never know. It would be kind of ironic if like a fifth round pick turned into being their franchise quarterback after taking so many swings in the first round. That's not my expectation for it. I kind of just think, for where he was drafted, even if he turns into just, a guy you develop and he's a backup quarterback for a few years and could be a spot starter, I think that would be a major win. But anything more than that is just bonus. And unfortunately, as you mentioned, he hasn't practiced and he won't play in the preseason. So kind of on ice in year one after the injury late last year. So I think in 2025 we'll get a better look at him.
Yeah, definitely. And moving into the backfield, Brees Hall, Izzy Anaconda, you guys drafted last year out of Pittsburgh, and you have two new draft picks, Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen, who's a complete monster out of Wisconsin. What do you make of the backfield situation? Because, I mean, personally looking at it, it's a really good backfield, or at least has the potential to be. But do you think it lacks a veteran backup presence? Are you good with the state of the backfield? What's your story on that?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, very really young backfield. Brees Hall's the oldest back in the room, which is crazy. He's entering his third year and is still considered a young player. I really like it. I know it doesn't have that veteran presence, but the running back is in particular is the position where guys don't really last very long. Usually, you get the best production from these backs on their rookie deal. So I like that the Jets kind of loaded up on that. I would be almost surprised in a way if Izzy Abanikanda, who they drafted this year, makes the roster just based on how things have kind of played out with them drafting two guys this year and Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen. And they've switched schemes. They were more of an outside zone running team last year, and this year they're going to be more of a gap inside power team. So that fits more to what Brees Hall and Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, both those guys are bigger backs. That kind of fits their skill set some more. But Allen has looked great in not only the preseason, but pretty much since he's got here in OTAs and minicamp. So I think they finally have someone who you could plug in and give Brees some rest that you feel comfortable with, which is something they didn't really have the last 2 years.
Yeah, definitely. Almost finishing up on the offensive side of the football, I've seen a minority of Jet fans complain about this, and I don't know if you take any stock into it or what the story is. Do you have any concerns about the tight end room? Because I mean, obviously CJ Uzama didn't work out as a Jet. He just got cut by the Eagles. So now you have Tyler Conklin, who's been a solid veteran for the last few years. You got Zach Kuntz, who was a draft pick last year. You got Jeremy Ruckert, who really hasn't seen the field that much in his short career. And then a couple of backups and a couple of scrubs. Do you have any lack of confidence in that room, or do you think it's overblown?
Honestly, no. I think assuming health, because if you lose a couple of the guys at the top, then obviously I think the depth you could bring into question. But I think Tyler Conklin is actually kind of underrated by some Jet fans. I know like Brock Bowers was talked about a lot for the Jets, and if they drafted him, I would have totally understood it because I think he's a unique weapon. But um, Tyler Conklin has put up production the last 2 years with really pretty poor quarterback play. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if he's, pretty much, top 12 again. He was last year in both receptions and receiving yards for tight ends. So I think that continues. I think he improves with Aaron Rodgers. And I've always been a big fan of Jeremy Ruckert going back to his days at Ohio State. I thought he was a underutilized pass catcher there and kind of here too as well in his first 2 years in the league. But really solid blocker, does a lot of the dirty work that doesn't really show up in the box score. But I'm more than comfortable with those two guys being your top two tight ends. I think the Jets are going to run a lot of two tight end sets too, so they'll see the field.
As far as the last few years, I mean, my brother's a Jets fan. I always mention it. So I've actually like legitimately watched Jets football. Um, the Gase era, the Bowles era, the Saleh era. It's been obviously a pretty tough ride for Jet fans the last few years, but I think this is one of the more talented offensive lines that the Jets have put together. But there are some, of course, injury concerns where you have Tyron Smith, who, he's known to be on the sideline a few games a year. AVT has had two serious injuries in the past 2 seasons. Some questions about the depth because Max Mitchell has the blood clot thing. Do you have any legitimate concern with this offensive line? And if you do or don't, whatever your answer may be, do you think this is the best one they've had in years?
Yeah, I definitely think it's the best one that they've had in a long time. And the injury concern is a legitimate one, but I think Unlike a year ago, they're in a better spot to deal with injuries. They're starting, excuse me, they're starting tackles last year. They were going into it with Dwayne Brown and Mekhi Becton. And Becton at that point hadn't played in a couple years, essentially. And Dwayne Brown was banged up all training camp. Now, this year, yes, you bring in, Tyron Smith, who misses games every year, and you trade for Morgan Moses also, who really solid right tackle, but missed 3 games last year. Well, they went out and drafted in the first round Olu Fashanu, a really good pass protecting left tackle. And he's another one who I think has looked very strong in camp so far. So I just feel like with bringing in the 2 veterans at tackle, if they didn't go then add a top offensive tackle in the draft, I'd be concerned if Max Mitchell or Carter Warren were the first tackle to come in if and when there's an injury. But now at this point, if one of your 2 guys goes down, which at 33 years old for both Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses is likely to happen, I would be surprised if either one of those guys play a full 17. You have a young guy who was a top 11 pick in the draft that a lot of people viewed as the best pass protecting tackle and someone who has a very high ceiling at the position. So I just think that on paper it's a good line, but even their contingency plan for injury is much improved than it was a year ago. So I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah, and we all know O-line depth is a huge problem around the league, but I think at least right now the Jets have it pretty much under control. There's not many questions about the defense. I mean, the Jets defense under Sal, other than 2021, has been pretty damn good. But we talked a little bit earlier about the Hassan Reddick situation. Talking now about Will McDonald. There are some Jet fans who like the pick. There are some Jet fans who kind of hold a grudge against the pick because of the situation surrounding it. Oh, you could have got an offensive lineman, another weapon, whatever. And obviously, it's now more in the spotlight because of the Hassan Riddick situation. How do you think he's done during camp thus far? What are your thoughts on the whole Will McDonald controversy?
Yeah, so for full transparency, I wasn't a fan of the pick when they made it. I was very caught off guard when they drafted an edge rusher that year. But I will say I think too many people hold that against him because they weren't a fan of the pick at the time. Like I don't think it's fair to hold that against the player once they're here. Last year, very limited sample size, only played 19% of snaps, but I thought he was good as a situational pass rusher. I mean, he still had 3.5 sacks, and his pressure rate was pretty solid considering the limited number of plays that he had. And in camp this year and the preseason too, he's gotten after the quarterback. I think at his size, and especially right now, he's not ready to be an every down player. He's not good enough against the run yet, but as a situational pass rusher, can he be someone who plays maybe somewhere around 40, 45% of snaps this year and in obvious passing situations and give you between 7 and 10 sacks as a rotational player? I think yes. I think he can fill that role. So I'm still holding some Will McDonald stock going into his second year.
Yeah, and the thing I'll say about that is, as I said, I've have Jets fans that are family and friends and all that stuff. What I say, like, that it's maybe a positive in terms of the Will McDonald pick is you see organizations around the league have sustained success, and that really comes to their drafting. I think the Eagles are a top example because, you know, they had Fletcher Cox, they still have Brandon Graham, some of those guys, but then they started drafting some young cats, Jordan Davis. They drafted Jalen Carter last year. They drafted Cam Jargons a couple of years ago, who's going to start at center for the retired Jason Kelsey. So it's a part of the contingency plan. But I think the Jets' problem is that their inefficiencies at certain positions, namely quarterback, in the last few years, and the offensive line have prevented that sustained success to where, usually, again, you could have a luxury pick at a certain position, which I think Will McDonald was. But at the same time, that pick, again, could be used in certain areas. But if the Jets are a winning football team this year, I really don't think anyone's going to care about it. Just that's my personal opinion. Um, Moving into more of the camp talk, what do you think is the biggest strength and biggest weakness coming into the year for the New York Jets?
So the strength to me, I definitely think is just their defense as a whole, which seems obvious after the last couple of years what they've done, but they are just they're deep at every level. I mean, on the line, having someone like Quinnen Williams and Hassan Reddick when he shows, but Jermaine Johnson and the depth that they have there. And then at linebacker, CJ Mosley and Quincy Williams, I think became an excellent duo last year. And then I don't really know how you beat a cornerback trio if you include Michael Carter in there with Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. Just really strong. And they've showed out, I think, a ton in training camp and in the not the preseason, not the starters have played, but in the joint practices, they've made life hard for some of these opposing teams. A weaker spot or a potentially weaker spot, that's something that I'm maybe a little bit concerned with, is the depth at wide receiver after Garrett Wilson. So you bring in Mike Williams, which I'm a fan of, but I wonder how long it's going to take him to ramp up and get back to being 100%. And then you have like Alan Lazard, who really struggled last year. And then a couple of young guys in the slot in Malachi Corley, who I like, but is a third round rookie. So I'm trying to temper expectations. And Xavier Gipson, who was, okay in a limited role last year. But if God forbid Garrett Wilson goes down with an injury, I think that's an area where they can't really afford to lose one of their top guys at the wide receiver spot, because there's just a lot of question marks and unknown with the rest of the depth in that room.
Yeah, definitely. Moving into a couple other different things, you could consider backup wide receiver this, as we're considering it over here in Giant Land. Important camp battles, roster battles, position battles over in Jet Land.
Yeah, it's wide receiver is definitely a room to watch for, kind of just to see the pecking order, like who's going to end up being the de facto number 2 receiver and so on. So I would mention that one, but honestly, the defensive line is a tough one, because they have like 13 or 14 guys fighting for 9 or 10 spots, and it's going to be really hard to decide which 9 or 10 guys that they're going to keep. There's been a lot of young guys who came in as UDFAs that have really stood out in both training camp and in these preseason games. Braden McGregor out of Michigan, Leonard Taylor out of Miami, and Eric Watts out of UConn are 3 guys on the defensive line who, on a lot of teams, yeah, they're UDFAs, but I think they've done enough in training camp where they probably deserve to make an NFL roster. I just don't know if the Jets are going to be able to do that with, how full they are. So kind of just watching those guys and seeing who from that group is going to make the squad, and where they decide to make some cuts if they want to keep, like in the wide receiver room, there's thoughts of it. Are they going to carry 6 or 7 receivers? So if they go 7, then where are you going to lose that other roster spot? And who stays for special teams purposes? It's not going to be easy to narrow this thing down to just 53 guys. So one of the spots again that I just mentioned there on the defensive line has been really interesting to see play out.
Okay. Who is standing out and who's been disappointing to you in training camp?
Yeah, I mean, for standouts, I just mentioned defensive line, not a young guy, but someone that they brought in as a free agent that they honestly got in the bargain bin. But Takk McKinley was a former first round pick from the Atlanta Falcons in 2017. They signed him late. I thought, okay, this is someone who's maybe competing for a roster spot, probably doesn't have the best chance. He's honestly looked like their best edge rusher at times. Now, Jermaine Johnson hasn't played in the preseason, so that's not really fair. But of guys who have played, I mean, he's been good against the run. He consistently gets pressure. Same thing in the joint practices. He's been getting pressure. And with no Hassan Reddick in camp, he's gotten a lot of run with the ones. Same with a guy like Michael Clemens. And I think Takk McKinley in particular is someone who's been a surprise in a major positive way. Disappointment, there hasn't been a ton, but I would say I mentioned him earlier, but Izzy Abanikanda going into his second year, the fact that they felt the need to draft 2 running backs, and then even when Tariq Cohen was here before he retired just a few weeks ago, even Tariq Cohen, who's been essentially out of the league for 3 years, was ahead of him in the pecking order. So it just feels like he's someone who isn't going to be on this team after a year, and that's a 4th or 5th round pick that you would have liked to see stick around a little bit longer than just a year. So he's probably a little bit more on the disappointing side.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that one of the guys, at least based on the preseason game against the Commanders. I don't think he played against the Panthers. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was injured. Again, could be wrong. Jared Bernard Converse, the draft pick from LSU about a year ago. So, or was it this year that you guys drafted him?
Yeah, it was last year, and we didn't really see much of him as a rookie last year because he was injured. That's another good call out because he's been another pleasant surprise. I thought he was strong in that game against Washington, um, and really we didn't see much of him at all a year ago. So I would definitely call him out as a positive.
Yeah, definitely. And who are you looking forward to watch on Saturday? Whether it's a preseason favorite or it's a guy who's looking to compete for a spot, or multiple guys.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, no starters for the Jets in this one, but I've loved watching Braylon Allen play the running back so far in training camp in the preseason games. I mean, I thought he looked stellar against Washington, was a little bit quieter against Carolina, but he is just so hard to bring down when he gets to the second level. And, watching him just run over defensive backs has been really a lot of fun. He's young still. He's still 20 years old, hasn't even turned 21 years old yet. Um, Aaron Rodgers has been in the league as long as Braylon Allen's been alive, which is just crazy. But watching him in training camp and in the preseason to me has been a lot of fun. And the rookies are usually the guys that I attach to or draft picks. Like if Olu Fashanu was healthy this week, I would have said him, but he's dealing with a little bit of an elbow, so I'd be surprised if he played in this game. But to me, I think watching Braylon Allen just run nasty is something to look for.
Yeah, definitely. And final thing, as usual, where can people find you, your content, your work, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I'm on social media and on YouTube at Matt O'Leary NY, talking all things Jets, daily videos, daily updates. We like to keep it light and fun, but yeah, you can follow along there and find my work.
Of course, Matt, thank you for your time. Of course, look for Matt O'Leary, Jets content. And I'm pretty sure, at least if I'm correct, you do some work with Giants content creator Anthony Rivardo sometimes, if I'm correct on that.
Yeah, so I do a stream with him every Monday and Thursday morning. We cover both the Jets and the Giants, the Big Apple Blitz. So talking all things New York football with him every Monday and Thursday on the YouTube channel, Big Apple Blitz.
Of course, ladies and gentlemen, go check that out. Once again, thank you for coming on, Matt. Everyone else, check out his stuff. As for this channel, like, comment, subscribe, do all the good stuff, share out on podcast platforms. And the next time we will be talking, or we will talk about cuts and the recap of this game. Appreciate you guys. See you later.